Welcome to a new topic in Angular called as forms. In this session we'll understand what forms are, the types of forms we have, and what classes Angular has given to work with forms. Forms are well used in HTML pages for any input using HTML elements like input, radio, checkbox, etc. So basically we have forms something like this in HTML. When you say form, in this we'll have all the input controls like input type equal to text, you have a text box, a radio button, a checkbox, all that things, all the HTML controls you'll place in a form, and then you'll have a submit button type equal to submit. So this is how you frame a form. Save it and you see. Okay, so this is a form, and when you click on submit, you pass on to a server-side programming language with traditional web development. But here Angular Angular considers form a bit special, and it provides certain classes. Now, to understand all these in detail, let us see how Angular differentiates a form and a HTML control. I'll save this form, and let's see this in DOM. You have a form along with class ng untouched, ng pristine, ng valid. But if I use an input type equal to text and save this, you see you have a form, you have the input type equal to text, but the difference is form has got a class already attached to it, whereas for the input by default I do not have a class. So this is a difference between how Angular considers a normal HTML input and a form. Angular treats form a bit special, and that I can say by seeing this class that is applied to a form and not applied to a input control by default. So Angular adds special classes like ng untouched, ng pristine, ng valid to an HTML form by default, but not to other HTML controls that we saw. For any form, validation plays a major role, and Angular provides two classes using which an HTML control can be validated or checked using some properties. So the two classes that Angular provides is form control and form group. To perform validation on a form group instance needs to be created for that form. So we need to create an instance of form group. A form control instance needs to be created for each input field on that form. So we had a form, and in a form we'll be having all the input controls like this, number of more than one or as per our requirement. So for every form control or the input control that is inside a form, we need to create an instance of class called as form control, and for every form we need to create an instance of form group. And now that we deal with forms, let's install or let's apply Bootstrap. To have Bootstrap forms, install Bootstrap using npm install Bootstrap and add the bootstrap main.css in global style.css. So let's apply Bootstrap to our forms example, and then we'll move on in understanding form control and form group classes. So come to the console. Let me save this, and I'll have a button also. Now if you see, this is how a normal button comes. Now I'll apply Bootstrap. I'll say npm install Bootstrap, and also let me take out the package.json, in which for the moment I'm sure you don't see Bootstrap. Okay, and also in the code 365 example 1, the one we are working, I'll come into the node modules and I'll see for Bootstrap, which I don't have. So now when I press enter, it installs Bootstrap. Let me do it again. The installation is happening now. Okay, so Bootstrap installation done, and you see we got Bootstrap version 4, and also node modules, you see Bootstrap. Now how do I use Bootstrap? For that, all I need to do is come to this directory bootstrap dist css, bootstrap dist css, and the file I need to import is bootstrap min.css, bootstrap min.css. So this particular thing I need to put it in global style.css, and global style, you can see that. Close the source and close the app, and you see style.css. All you need to do is import it. Now save it. For the moment you don't see any change again, but if I say, or I better comment this out for a while, you can see a change over here, but we'll use the classes of button from Bootstrap, class btn dash primary. Now if I save it, for the moment no change at all, but if I uncomment this and save it, you see the button got bootstrapped. So this is how you install Bootstrap and apply Bootstrap to your application globally. In this session we'll see what form control and form group in a bit detailed way. Form control belongs to the HTML controls in a form. So as I said, the controls that you put inside a HTML form, to those controls this class belongs. If an instance of this class is created for all the input fields available on a form, then the validation or checking of the value stored in the input field can be performed using some of its properties like value, valid, dirty, errors, etc. So we'll place all input controls in this form and will somehow create instance of form control, and if we are able to successfully create an instance of form control, we get certain properties like value, valid, dirty, errors, and all those such properties, using which validation on every control can be done easily. Similar to form control, we have form group, and form group belongs to HTML form having controls in it. So a form with certain controls in it, the form group instance will be applied to the HTML form. And if an instance of this class is created for the form having the input fields, then the validation or checking is done using the same properties, the properties that you heard, value, valid, dirty, using the same properties that are available for a form control instance. Form group of a form returns true if all the controls in that form are valid. So if every control inside a form is valid, then the form group also will be valid. So it's not required to iterate over all the controls in the form. So if every control is a valid control inside a form, then indirectly the form itself is valid. And these properties are same for every class, like the form group or the form control, you have these properties in common. And these properties are like, value is used to check the current value in the input field, what value you have inside the current or inside the text box, you can refer to that using value property. Valid, if no validators are performed, then it's true initially. And you also have an opposite to this, which is invalid, which is again a property. Dirty, initially it is false. If typed something, then it is true. And the opposite of dirty is pristine. So initially it will be true, initially dirty is false, then the opposite is pristine, initially it will be true. If typed something, then it is false. Touched, initially false. If focused and blurred, then it is true. Opposite is untouched. So we'll see all these properties live in action in the coming sessions. We have been talking about form control and form groups. We need to create an instance of these two classes, and once an instance is created, we'll get such properties like value, valid, dirty. These are the properties that can be obtained with the instances of either a form group or a form class, and using these properties validation can be performed. But how do we create an instance of any of these two classes? The creation of an instance of either form group or a form control can be done in two ways. We'll see what the two ways are now. So the types of forms can be of two types. By default, Angular doesn't provide any class or instance to an input field. Like we saw, for a form we have classes like ng untouched, ng pristine, ng valid coming for a form group or the form, but not for a control. That can be created in two ways. So the instance of form control and form group are created in two ways: template driven forms and reactive forms. Let us see what template driven forms are. Template driven forms is to apply Angular directives ng form, ng model and ng model group. We didn't discuss much about ng model group till now, but we'll do that in the coming sessions. To the forms in a template, Angular will create the instance of these classes. So when it is template driven forms, what we need to do is we need to apply certain directives, these are the directives, to a form or a control. And once you do that, Angular will take the responsibility of creating the instances of the form group and form control. So using these directives, we can hand over the responsibility of creating an instance of form group or form control to the framework, and Angular takes care of providing an instance of either a form group or a form control. And the second is model driven forms or reactive forms. Is explicitly create these instances by writing code. Such forms are also called as reactive forms. So in the second type, or in reactive forms, we as a programmer takes the responsibility of creating these instances, the form group and form control instances, by some code. So it's two things: either provide the responsibility to the framework by using these directives and get an instance of form group and form control, or as a programmer we need to write some code with which an instance of either form group or form control is created. Once an instance is created, thereafter we can use these properties and perform the validation. Template driven forms are created by Angular when any of the three directives are applied to an HTML control or even a form having some HTML controls. So we'll take Angular's help and get the form control and form group instances created, and then we'll do some validation. Now we need to understand what these directives are. For that, let us see the same example that we saw initially, wherein for a form we see a class ng untouched, pristine and valid, but for an input control we did not see such a class. Now what we'll do is we'll use ng model. We'll apply this directive to our control and then we'll see what change happens. Template driven forms are created by Angular when any of the three directives are applied. So we'll start with ng model. When the ng model directive is applied to an HTML input control, Angular creates a form control instance that is associated with that input. So simply applying this directive to a HTML control, Angular creates an instance of form control. So we'll try to apply ng model over here and then we'll save it. So no issues, but at the same time, do we have the classes getting applied? Now you see input and class equal to ng untouched, ng pristine and ng valid are quite the same classes that a form has. So initially when I said for a form these classes come by default, now Angular has also applied those classes to a form control when I said ng model. Now we'll get this input control into TypeScript, and that is possible using #iname, and I'll assign ng model, or so we'll simply move on this first, and when I do the click on this, I'll call a function and I'll pass iname, and here I'll receive it. I'll say function and iname, and I'll say console log iname. I'll save both the files, see the output in console. If I do the click over here, you see the class, the HTML code has displayed in the TypeScript. Now if I do this like iname equal to ng model, and if I save this and if I do the click, now you see I have an object wherein I see form control, an instance of it, and I also see dirty, disabled, enabled. These are the properties that we talked initially. Touched is true, untouched will be false. So these are the properties that are opposite in nature: disabled, enabled. We'll use these properties like value, valid, dirty, pristine, touched, untouched. We'll use all these properties and try to perform certain validations in the next session.